Part 1. The Timeless Question. Perhaps at least once in life, each of us has sat in silence and wondered, why is this happening to me right now? It might be a major turning point such as losing a job, ending a relationship, or saying goodbye to a loved one. Or it might be something small, missing the bus, messing up a project, or having an appointment canceled at the last minute. In those moments, we often feel confused, even angry, as if the universe is somehow playing tricks on us, forcing us into situations we didn't ask for. Yet if we pause and look more deeply, we discover that these moments invite us to a deeper question. Could it be that everything in life happens for a reason? In Buddhist teachings, life is compared to a river that never stops flowing. This river carries joy and sorrow, success and failure, comfort and pain. As human beings, we tend to choose. We want to hold on to the pleasant parts and push away the painful ones. But the irony is, the harder we cling to joy or resist suffering, the heavier life feels. From this perspective, the real question isn't, why did this happen to me? But rather, what can I learn from what is happening right now? I remember a close friend who lost her job just as her family was preparing to pay for her child's college tuition. For months, she was devastated, drowning in anxiety. But eventually, when she found the courage to look at her situation differently, she began to see it as a chance to re-examine her career path. That very loss forced her to learn new skills. And within a year, she found a better job and gained a level of confidence she had never known before. Looking back, she said something unforgettable. If I hadn't lost my job, I would never have grown the way I did. This reminds me of an old Eastern saying. Within misfortune lies blessing. Within blessing lies misfortune. Life doesn't unfold in neat, linear patterns of good or bad. What feels like a curse today might become a gift tomorrow. And what seems perfect now might turn into a challenge later. That is why, in the old Zen story of the farmer who lost his horse, he simply smiled and said, "Who knows if this is good or bad?" I too once went through a phase where this question haunted me. I had left a stable job to pursue a new project, full of excitement, only to fail quickly. For months, I was crushed by regret, blaming myself for making the wrong choice. Yet as time passed, I realized that failure had given me something invaluable. It forced me to confront myself honestly, uncover abilities I had long ignored, and most importantly, learn how to rise from my own wounds. Without that fall, I would never have found a path I walk now, a path aligned with my values and dreams. Seen from a wider lens, every event in life, whether large or small, is like a door. The issue isn't whether the door closes or opens, but whether we have the courage to walk through. When one opportunity disappears, we can either sit in bitterness or remind ourselves that there are always other doors waiting. As many sages have said, the universe never takes away something without also offering something else. The only question is, will we open our hearts to receive it? And so we return to the timeless question, why do these turning points arrive at precisely those moments? Perhaps it is because at that very moment, we are ready to face a lesson that would have been too difficult had it come earlier, or wasted if it came later. From the Buddhist view, everything happens at exactly the time it needs to. Not too soon, not too late, but just enough to awaken us, to remind us that we're still flowing in a river full of surprises, and full of opportunities to wake up. Part 2, the nature of impermanence. One of the most profound truths in Buddhist wisdom is impermanence. The recognition that nothing in life lasts forever. Every joy eventually fades, every pain eventually shifts, and every moment, no matter how intense, eventually dissolves into another. At first glance, this may seem like a harsh reality, but in truth, it carries a gift. Impermanence means that no suffering is permanent, and it also teaches us to treasure the beauty of the present before it slips away. Think of the seasons. Spring does not cling to its blossoms. nor does autumn resist the falling of its leaves. Winter arrives, and then it too makes way for spring once again. This cycle of change is not a tragedy, but the very rhythm of life. Yet as human beings, we often fight against it. We want happy moments to stay frozen, relationships never to change, and good health to last indefinitely. When life inevitably shifts, we grieve, resist, or deny what's happening. But resisting change is like trying to hold back the tide with your bare hands. Exhausting and ultimately impossible. I once met an elderly teacher who had lived through war, poverty, and the loss of nearly his entire family. He told me something that struck deep. At first, I wanted to keep everything the same, to keep the people I loved, to keep the life I knew, but life kept taking and giving, taking and giving. Eventually, I realized that impermanence wasn't my enemy. It was my teacher. It showed me that every moment was precious, because none could be repeated. His eyes sparkled when he said that, not with sadness, but with peace. We don't need dramatic tragedies to see this truth. Just look at a simple flower on your desk. Today it blooms in full color. In a week it begins to wither. If you try to hold on to the bloom forever, you will suffer. But if you enjoy its fragrance today, knowing it won't last, you actually love it more fully. The same applies to relationships, opportunities, even to our own youth. By embracing impermanence, we stop clinging and start living more deeply. There was a time in my own life when I couldn't accept this. I had built a close friendship that I thought would last forever. We shared everything, and I assumed it would remain unchanged no matter what. But life took us in different directions. At first, I resisted and suffered terribly. I tried to recreate the past, to force the bond to remain the same. Only later did I understand that friendship had already given me its gift. Its impermanence didn't mean it was meaningless. It meant it was complete. When I finally accepted that truth, I could release the pain and carry the memories as a blessing rather than a burden. Impermanence also frees us from despair. When we are in suffering, it's easy to believe that our pain will never end. But just as no spring can last forever, no winter can either. Life constantly moves. Recognizing this can give us hope. A broken heart heals, grief softens, wounds close, and new doors open. Nothing in life is static, and that includes our suffering. This truth doesn't erase the pain instantly, but it gives us courage to endure, knowing that even the darkest night eventually gives way to dawn. There's a beautiful teaching in Zen. This too shall pass. We often apply it to difficulties, but it also applies to joys. Both pass, and that's why both should be cherished while they're here. Imagine if we could meet every moment with that awareness, how much more grateful, present, and alive we would feel. For me, the lesson of impermanence reshaped the way I look at daily life. I no longer try to freeze my happiest moments in fear they will disappear. Instead, I try to savor them, knowing their fleeting nature is exactly what makes them precious. And when pain arises, I remind myself that it too is temporary, like a passing storm. The clouds will clear, even if right now I can't yet see the sun. So the teaching of impermanence is not about sadness or loss. It's about liberation. When we stop resisting change, we stop suffering unnecessarily. We learn to flow with life instead of fighting against it. And in doing so, we discover a deeper kind of peace. The peace of living fully in each moment, knowing it is unique, unrepeatable, and already enough. Part 3. The Law of Karma. Seeds of Cause and Effect. Another cornerstone of Buddhist wisdom is the law of karma, the natural principle of cause and effect. Many people misunderstand karma as some sort of cosmic punishment or reward system, as if an invisible judge is keeping score. But in truth, karma is far simpler and more profound. Every action, every word, and even every thought plants a seed. Over time, those seeds grow into the fruits we experience in our lives. Think of a garden. If you plant mango seeds, you won't harvest apples. If you sow thorns, you can't expect roses. Life works in much the same way. The choices we make today, our attitudes, the way we treat others, the habits we nurture, shape the experiences we meet tomorrow. Karma is not about divine judgment. It is about natural consequence. I once worked with a colleague who handled stress with patience and kindness. Even when deadlines were overwhelming, she spoke calmly, listened to others, and encouraged the team. Over time, people trusted her deeply and supported her in return. Another colleague, equally talented, reacted to pressure with anger and blame. At first, people tolerated it, but eventually, relationships around him fractured. Years later, the difference between their careers was stark. The first thrived, surrounded by allies. The second became isolated. Neither outcome was luck. They were simply the natural results of the seeds each had been planting every day. What strikes me most about karma is how subtle it can be. A fleeting thought of resentment, if nourished repeatedly, can become a habit of bitterness that colors everything we see. On the other hand, a small act of compassion, like offering a smile to a stranger or forgiving a minor slight, can ripple outward in ways we may never witness directly. I once held the door for someone in a rush. They later told me it turned around their entire day. That moment cost me nothing, but it planted a seed of kindness that bore fruit in them, and perhaps in others they interacted with afterward. Of course, karma doesn't always ripen immediately. Sometimes years pass before the results of an action return. This delay can make us think our choices don't matter. But just as a seed doesn't sprout overnight, the conditions of life unfold in their own time. When we plant wisely with patience, the harvest will come. And when we plant carelessly, the weeds eventually overtake us. I remember a time when I carried anger against someone who betrayed my trust. I replayed the situation in my mind over and over, feeding that resentment daily. Outwardly, I acted normal, but inwardly I was poisoning my own heart. Months later, I realized it wasn't betrayal that continued to hurt me. It was the seed of bitterness I kept watering. Once I stopped feeding it, the wound began to heal. That experience taught me that karma isn't only about what happens outside us. It's also about the inner landscapes we cultivate. This understanding of karma brings both responsibility and empowerment. Responsibility, because we can no longer blame life, fate, or others for everything. Our present reality is in part shaped by the seeds we've sown in the past. But empowerment, too, because from this very moment, we can begin planting new seeds. Each thought of kindness, each act of integrity, each choice of patience over anger is like planting flowers in a once barren field. The harvest won't be instant, but it will come. Some people hear about karma and feel weighed down, fearing past mistakes have doomed them. But Buddhism teaches that while we cannot change yesterday's seeds, we can stop watering them today. If we stop feeding old habits, they wither. And by planting new seeds consistently, the garden of our lives transforms. In this way, karma is not a prison but a pathway to freedom. What I love most about this teaching is how practical it is. We don't need to wait for some distant heaven or fear eternal punishment. The quality of our life is being shaped moment by moment right now. If we want a kinder, more peaceful world, it begins with the seeds we choose to plant today. So the law of karma invites us to live with awareness. Every word we speak, every thought we nurture, every action we take matters. The question is, what kind of garden are we creating with our daily choices? Part 4, the art of letting go. One of the hardest lessons in life is learning to let go. Our minds cling to people, possessions, achievements, identities, even to ideas about how life should be. We believe that if we just hold on tightly enough, we can keep things from changing. But as the Buddha taught, clinging is the root of suffering. The more we grasp, the more pain we feel when life inevitably shifts. Letting go does not mean giving up or becoming indifferent. Rather, it is about releasing our need to control what cannot be controlled. It is about loosening the grip of attachment so we can flow with life instead of fighting against it. Like opening a clenched fist, letting go makes space. Space for healing, for freedom, for new possibilities to enter. There's a Zen parable about two monks walking along a muddy road. They came to a river where a woman stood, unable to cross. One monk, bound by strict rules, kept walking. The other carried the woman across on his back. Hours later, the first monk scolded him. "Why did you carry her? We monks are not supposed to touch women." The second replied, "Brother, I set her down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" This story reveals how often we continue to carry burdens in our minds long after the moment has passed. Letting go means setting them down. I have struggled with this lesson myself. For years, I carried resentment towards someone who had wronged me, even after they had moved on with their life. I kept replaying the hurt in my head, as if by holding on to it I could somehow make it right. But all I achieved was prolonging my own suffering. The day I finally decided to let go, not to excuse their behavior, but to release my grip on the pain, was the day I felt free again. Forgiveness, I realized, is less about the other person and more about liberating ourselves from the prison of bitterness. Letting go also applies to our ambitions and expectations. We often map out exactly how our lives should unfold. The career, the partner, the achievements. When reality doesn't match our script, we feel cheated. But life rarely follows our blueprints. Sometimes the very thing we thought was a failure turns out to be a hidden blessing. I once planned a project with great passion, only to see it collapse. At first, I was devastated, but that failure pushed me into a direction I would never have considered otherwise, one that ultimately brought me more fulfillment than my original plan ever could. By letting go of the rigid expectation, I discovered something new. This doesn't mean we should live passively, without dreams or goals. It means holding them lightly, like a bird resting on your palm. If you squeeze too tightly, you harm the bird. If you keep your hand open, the bird may stay or may fly away. But either way, you have honored its freedom. Life is the same. When we loosen our grip, we stop suffocating our own possibilities. In daily life, letting go can be as simple as releasing the need to win every argument, the urge to be right, or the desire to control how others see us. How often do we waste energy trying to fix someone's opinion of us, when in truth, their perception is not within our control? The moment we accept that, we reclaim our peace. I recall watching the ocean during a storm. The waves crashed with incredible force, yet the ocean did not resist. It absorbed, shifted, and returned to calm. To me, that is the essence of letting go. Not fighting against the waves, but trusting that the storm will pass and the water will settle again. Ultimately, letting go is an act of trust. Trust in the flow of life. Trust that we will be okay even when circumstances don't align with our desires. Trust that by releasing what no longer serves us, we make space for what is truly meant for us. It is not weakness, but courage. The courage to open our hands, our hearts, and step into the unknown with peace. Part 5, Suffer as a Teacher. Most of us spend our lives running from suffering. We distract ourselves, deny it, numb it, or try to cover with busyness. Yet Buddhism teaches that suffering is not an enemy to be defeated, but a teacher to be listened to. Without suffering, we would never seek wisdom. Without discomfort, we would never grow. Pain is like a knock at the door of our awareness. It tells us something needs attention. Just as physical pain warns us of injury so we can heal, emotional or spiritual suffering signals that something in our lives, or in the way we perceive our lives, is out of balance. If we silence that signal too quickly, through denial, blame, or distraction, we miss the chance to learn what it is trying to show us. I remember a period of deep loneliness in my life. At the time, I saw it only as a burden, something to escape. But as the weeks stretched on, I began to sit with that loneliness rather than run from it. Slowly, I realized it was teaching me something important. I had been seeking validation from others instead of cultivating a deeper relationship with myself. That pain became a mirror, showing me where I was empty. Over time, it guided me toward practices of self-compassion and self-trust that have stayed with me to this day. In a similar way, failure often disguises itself as suffering. When a cherished goal slips from our hands, our hearts ache. But inside that ache lies a lesson about impermanence, resilience, and humility. A friend of mine once invested years into building a business, only to watch it collapse. At first, he was crushed, but later he told me, that failure broke me open. It forced me to examine who I really was beyond my job title. It taught me more about myself than success ever did. His suffering became the doorway to a deeper strength. What makes suffering a true teacher is not the pain itself, but the way we relate to it. If we resist, we become bitter. If we embrace it with curiosity, we become wiser. Imagine fire. Touch it recklessly and it burns, but learn from it and it can warm your home, cook your food, and light your path. Suffering is like that fire, dangerous when resisted, transformative when understood. Sometimes we think happiness is the absence of suffering, but the truth is more nuanced. Happiness often grows through suffering, the way lotus flowers bloom only in muddy waters. It is because we have known grief that we can truly appreciate joy. It is because we have walked through darkness that we cherish the light. I once spoke with someone who had survived a life-threatening illness. She told me, I would never wish that pain on anyone, but I would also never trade it away because it woke me up. It taught me what truly matters. Her words struck me. We often pray for suffering to be removed, but what if its deeper gift is awakening us to life's preciousness? Of course, this doesn't mean we should seek out suffering or romanticize it. Pain hurts, and it is natural to wish for relief. But when suffering arrives, as it inevitably does, we can choose to meet it with openness rather than fear. Instead of asking, why me? We can ask, what is this teaching me? That shift transforms suffering from a curse into a companion on the path of growth. When I look back at the hardest seasons of my life, the betrayals, the losses, the failures, I see them differently now. They were the teachers I didn't want but desperately needed. Each one carved away a layer of pride, fear, or illusion, leaving me a little more real, a little more awake. In this way, suffering becomes not just an obstacle, but a guide. It reminds us that we are human, that we are vulnerable, but also that we are resilient and capable of transformation. If we listen to its lessons, suffering can lead us not into despair, but into wisdom, compassion, and a deeper appreciation of life itself. Part 6, the practice of mindfulness. If suffering is a teacher, then mindfulness is a classroom in which we learn. Without awareness, life passes us by like a dream. We rush from one task to another, absorbed in worries about the future or regrets about the past. Mindfulness is the art of waking up, of anchoring ourselves in the present moment where life is actually happening. At its heart, mindfulness is simple. It is paying attention, fully and without judgment, to whatever is unfolding right now. Whether it is the breath moving in and out, the sound of rain on a window, or the taste of tea on the tongue, mindfulness invites us to return to this moment again and again. I first discovered mindfulness during a time of great stress. My mind was scattered, always rehearsing tomorrow's problems. Someone suggested I try focusing on my breath for just a few minutes each day. At first, I thought it was silly. How could something as ordinary as breathing make a difference? But as I persisted, I noticed subtle shifts. My thoughts slowed. My heart softened. I began to realize how rarely I was truly present in my own life. When we practice mindfulness, even mundane activities become sacred. Washing dishes is no longer a chore, but an opportunity to feel the warmth of the water, the smoothness of the porcelain, the rhythm of movement. Walking becomes meditation as we feel the ground beneath our feet and the air brushing against our skin. Eating transforms into gratitude when we notice the colors, textures, and flavors before us. Life stops being something we rush through and becomes something we savor. Science now confirms what ancient wisdom has long taught. Mindfulness reduces stress, strengthens focus, and improves emotional well-being. But beyond these benefits, mindfulness gives us something deeper. It reconnects us to the fullness of life. We stop living on autopilot and start engaging with the present, which is the only place joy is truly found. One of the most powerful aspects of mindfulness is its ability to create space between stimulus and response. Normally, we react automatically, driven by habit or emotion. But when we are mindful, we notice the rising of anger before it spills into words, the tightening of fear before it hardens into avoidance. In that pause, we gain freedom. We are no longer slaves to our impulses. We become authors of our choices. I recall an argument where I felt myself boiling with frustration. In the past, I would have snapped without thinking, escalating the conflict. But because of my mindfulness practice, I caught the sensation in my body, the heat in my chest, the quickening of my breath. I paused, breathed, and simply said, I need a moment. That small act prevented me from saying words I would later regret. Mindfulness, in that moment, turned a fight into an opportunity for understanding. Of course, mindfulness is not about eliminating thoughts or emotions. It is about meeting them with gentle awareness. When sadness arises, we notice it without pushing it away. When joy appears, we savor without clinging. Like watching clouds pass through the sky, we learn to observe the ever-changing weather of our minds without losing ourselves in the storm. Consistency is key. Just as muscles grow stronger with regular exercise, the mind becomes more spacious with daily mindfulness. Even 5 minutes a day can begin to shift the way we experience life. Over time, mindfulness becomes less a practice we do and more a way of being. What I find most beautiful is how mindfulness deepens our relationships. When we truly listen, without planning our reply, without distraction, we give others the gift of presence. I once had a friend tell me, I feel heard when I talk to you, as if I matter. That was mindfulness at work, creating connection without a single extra word. Ultimately, mindfulness is not about escaping reality, but embracing it. It teaches us to be fully alive to this moment, to taste the sweetness and the bitterness, to be awake to both the beauty and the sorrow of life. And in that awareness, we discover a quiet joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. Part 7, Compassion and Loving Kindness. If mindfulness teaches us to be present with ourselves, compassion teaches us to extend that presence to others. In Buddhism, compassion, karu, and loving kindness, metta, are considered two wings of the same bird. Without them, we cannot truly soar. Compassion is more than feeling sorry for someone. It is the deep recognition of our shared humanity, the awareness that just like us, every person we meet longs to be happy and struggles with suffering. Loving kindness goes a step further. It is a wish that all beings, without exception, find peace, joy, and freedom from pain. I once sat in a meditation retreat where we practiced loving kindness. The teacher asked us to silently repeat phrases like, "May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I live with ease." Then we extended those wishes outward, first to a loved one, then to a neutral person, then to someone we struggle with, and finally to all beings. At first, it felt mechanical, but over time, I noticed a softening inside me. I began to realize how often I had unconsciously carried judgments, even towards strangers. This practice reminded me that beneath all our differences, we share the same fragile heart. Compassion does not mean condoning harmful actions or letting others walk over us. Rather, it means seeing beyond the surface to recognize the pain that often fuels unskillful behavior. When someone lashes out in anger, it may be because they themselves are hurting. When someone is selfish, it may be because they are afraid of scarcity. Understanding this doesn't excuse harmful actions, but it helps us respond with wisdom instead of adding more hatred to the world. I once worked with a man who was notoriously difficult, critical, impatient, and quick to anger. My instinct was to avoid him. But one day, I learned he was caring for a sick parent at home, exhausted from sleepless nights. Suddenly, his behavior made sense. I didn't excuse it, but I could see it differently. From then on, I approached him with more patience, and our relationship gradually softened. Compassion turned conflict into connection. Loving kindness, too, transforms the way we move through the world. Imagine walking into a room, silently wishing well for everyone there. May you be happy. May you be at ease. No one else knows you're doing it, but you feel the difference. The heart relaxes, the eyes soften, and people sense your openness. I've tried this during tense meetings, and it changes the atmosphere, subtly but unmistakably. The challenge, of course, is extending compassion not just to others, but also to ourselves. Many of us are far harsher toward our own mistakes than toward anyone else's. We criticize ourselves with words we would never say to a friend. Yet Buddhism teaches that we cannot pour from an empty cup. Self-compassion is not selfish. It is a foundation for loving others. When we forgive our own imperfections, we are better able to forgive the imperfections of others. There is a story of the Buddha encountering a wounded animal. Instead of pushing it away or ignoring it, he gently tended to it with care. That image reminds me that compassion is not abstract. It is practical. It is found in the small acts, offering a listening ear, sharing a meal, sending a kind message, or simply choosing not to judge too quickly. What I love about compassion is that it creates a ripple effect. One act of kindness often inspires another. I recall a time when a stranger paid for my meal at a cafe. Surprised, I decided to pay it forward the next day by helping someone else. That simple gesture reminded me that kindness is contagious. In this way, compassion doesn't just heal individuals. It weaves communities together. Ultimately, compassion and loving kindness are not just emotions, but practices. They are muscles we strengthen through intention. Each day gives us countless opportunities. The driver who cuts us off, the colleague who interrupts us, the family member who disappoints us. In those moments, we can choose to react with irritation, or we can pause, breathe, and respond with compassion. The more we practice, the more we realize that compassion is not a burden, but a liberation. When we open our hearts, we stop carrying the heavy armor of judgment and resentment. We discover that kindness, far from draining us, actually replenishes us. And as we wish happiness for others, we find happiness blooming quietly within ourselves. Part 8, The Illusion of Self. One of the most profound teachings in Buddhism is the idea that the self we cling to so tightly is, in fact, an illusion. At first, this sounds strange, even unsettling. After all, isn't the self the very core of who we are? Yet the Buddha pointed out that what we call the self is not a solid, unchanging entity, but a collection of constantly shifting experiences. Thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and sensations that rise and fall like waves on the ocean. Think of a river. If you scoop up a handful of water, it is never the same water you held a moment before. The river is always flowing, always changing. In the same way, our bodies and minds are in continuous motion. Cells die and regenerate. Emotions appear and dissolve. Ideas evolve, what we call I is more like a process than a permanent thing. This teaching doesn't mean we don't exist at all. Rather, it means that our existence is not as fixed or separate as we imagine. The sense of I is a story the mind constructs, stitching together memories and roles. I am a parent, a worker, a friend. I like this, I dislike that. But if we look deeply, we see that these labels are temporary and incomplete when clung to too tightly. They create suffering because life will inevitably challenge them. I once defined myself entirely by my work. My identity was wrapped around success and productivity. But when I lost a job I valued deeply, I felt like my whole world collapsed. Who was I without that title? It was only through reflection that I realized my identity was never fixed to begin with. The self I mourned was only one version of me, a story I had told myself. Letting go of that rigid identity opened the door to discovering new parts of who I am. This illusion of self also shows up in the way we separate ourselves from others. We think of ourselves as distinct, independent beings. Yet when we look closer, we see that our lives are deeply interwoven. The food we eat comes from the labor of farmers, the soil, the rain, the sun, the clothes we wear, the homes we live in, the language we speak, all are the result of countless lives and conditions. To say we exist independently is like saying a single wave exists apart from the ocean. The truth is, we are expressions of a vast, interconnected web of life. Understanding this changes the way we relate to others. When the boundary between me and you softens, compassion naturally deepens. If I see myself as separate, I may think, your suffering is not my problem. But when I realize that your suffering is bound up with my own, indifference becomes impossible. There's a beautiful practice in Buddhism called interbeing, a term popularized by Thich Nhat Hanh. It reminds us that we do not just exist, we inter-exist. A sheet of paper, for example, contains the sunshine, the rain, the logger, the truck that transported it, the hands that shaped it. Without all these elements, the paper would not exist. Likewise, we are not isolated selves, but continuations of countless causes and conditions. This teaching also frees us from the heavy burden of ego. Much of our suffering comes from defending an image of ourselves, wanting to be seen as successful, attractive, right, or strong. But when we recognize that the self is fluid, we don't have to cling so desperately to these masks. We can be more playful, more humble, more open. I once met an elderly teacher who radiated lightness. Someone asked him, "How do you stay so peaceful?" He smiled and said, "Because I stopped trying to be anyone." His words stayed with me. When we let go of the illusion of a fixed self, we stop struggling to maintain it. In that release, we find freedom. This doesn't mean we lose our individuality. Each of us has unique expressions, like waves that rise in different shapes and sizes. But beneath the surface, we are all water. The illusion is not that we appear separate, but that we believe we are separate in any ultimate sense. Ultimately, the teaching of no self is not meant to confuse us, but to liberate us. It loosens the grip of attachment, helps us flow with change, and reminds us of our deep kinship with all beings. When we see through the illusion of self, the walls between us crumble, and we begin to experience life not as isolated individuals, but as part of something vast, fluid, and wondrous. Part 9, Impermanence and Change. If there is one truth that life teaches us again and again, it is impermanence. Everything changes. Seasons shift, relationships evolve, bodies age, fortunes rise and fall. Nothing stays the same, no matter how much we want it to. In Buddhism, this reality is called anicca, the truth of impermanence. At first, impermanence can feel unsettling. We want to hold on to the things we love, a child's laughter, the warmth of a friendship, the health of our bodies. We fear losing them, so we cling, But the more tightly we cling, the more painful it becomes when change inevitably arrives. I remember holding my grandmother's hand during her final days. For years, I had dreaded the thought of losing her. But sitting by her bedside, I realized that her passing was not only an ending, but also a continuation. The lessons she gave, the kindness she showed, the love she planted, all of it lived on in me and in others she touched. Impermanence didn't erase her. It transformed her presence into a new form. That experience shifted my understanding of loss. Impermanence is not only about endings. It is also about beginnings. The end of winter makes way for spring. The closing of one door opens another. Think of the countless times we thought a disappointment would break us, only to discover later that it cleared the path for something better. A relationship that ends, though painful, may create the space to meet someone who helps us grow in ways we never imagined. This truth can be a source of deep hope. When we suffer, impermanence reminds us that no pain lasts forever. Just as storms pass and skies clear, our struggles, too, will shift. I once went through a period of intense anxiety. At the time, it felt endless, as though I would never find peace again. But gradually, like night giving way to dawn, the fear loosened its grip. Looking back, I see how impermanence was quietly at work, reminding me that even the darkest chapters are not permanent. Mindfulness helps us embrace impermanence instead of resisting it. When we savor a moment fully, whether it's a cup of tea, a conversation with a friend, or the sight of sunlight streaming through the window, we don't need to cling because we are present. We know the moment will pass, but instead of fearing its loss, we receive it as a gift. Impermanence also teaches us humility. No matter how powerful, wealthy, or skilled we are, we cannot stop time. Empires crumble, reputations fade, even mountains erode. This truth humbles us, but it also equalizes us. We are all subject to change. Recognizing this can soften our pride and deepen our compassion for one another. One of my teachers once compared life to a sand mandala created by monks. They spend days carefully forming intricate patterns of colored sand, only to sweep it away at the end. The point is not to preserve the mandala forever, but to embody impermanence and release attachment. Watching them, I realize how often I build my own sand mandalas in life. Projects, identities, relationships, expecting them to last forever. But beauty often lies in their fleeting nature. When we truly accept impermanence, we live differently. We stop postponing gratitude. We tell people we love them now, not later. We enjoy the bloom of the flower today, knowing it will wither tomorrow. Instead of fearing change, we begin to dance with it. Impermanence is not something to grieve, but to honor. It is what makes life precious. If everything lasted forever, nothing would feel alive. The fragility of each moment is what makes it shine. Like dew on the grass at sunrise, its beauty lies precisely in its fleeting existence. So the invitation of impermanence is not despair, but awakening. When we embrace change, we free ourselves from clinging, and we discover a deeper peace. The peace of flowing with life, moment by moment, wave by wave. Part 10, Our Thoughts About Others. One of the most subtle yet powerful forces shaping our lives is the way we think about other people. Often, we assume that our judgments and opinions remain private, hidden safely in the mind. Yet, in truth, the energy of our thoughts radiates outward, influencing not only how we act, but also how others experience us. Think of a time when you walked into a room and, without anyone saying a word, you felt unwelcome. Maybe the smiles were forced, or the eyes avoided contact. On the surface, nothing obvious happened, but the atmosphere revealed the truth. That is the invisible power of thought. Even when unspoken, our attitudes seep into the environment, coloring every interaction. Buddhism teaches that our minds are not isolated containers, but fields of energy that connect with the world around us. A thought of kindness generates warmth. A thought of envy carries tension. A thought of compassion creates a sense of safety. When we shift our thinking, the quality of our presence changes, and people respond differently, even without knowing why. I remember a co-worker I struggled to get along with. For months, I carried irritation toward him, rehearsing complaints in my head. Even when I stayed polite, he could sense a distance, and our collaboration suffered. One day, I decided to experiment. Instead of feeding irritation, I silently wished him well. Each time I saw him, I repeated to myself, "May you be at peace. May you be happy." Within weeks, something shifted. Our conversation softened, and we began to laugh together. Nothing magical happened externally. It was simply the reflection of an inner shift in my thoughts. Our thoughts about others are not just private commentary. They are seeds we plant in the shared soil of relationship. Negative thoughts are like weeds. They may not be visible immediately, but over time they choke the connection. Positive thoughts, on the other hand, are like sunlight and water. They nourish trust and understanding. Of course, this does not mean we should deny difficulties or force ourselves to think positively all the time. Honest awareness is essential. If we feel anger or hurt, pretending otherwise will only suppress the truth. But instead of letting those emotions harden into fixed judgments, he is selfish, she is untrustworthy, we can hold space for compassion. We can recognize that, just like us, others act out their struggles, fears, and conditioning. This perspective invites humility. How many times have we misjudged someone, only to later discover the hidden pain behind their behavior? I once disliked a neighbor who seemed cold and dismissive. Months later, I learned she had recently lost her husband and was drowning in grief. My earlier judgments dissolved instantly, replaced by empathy. That experience taught me that my thoughts say as much about me as they do about others. When we train the mind to think kindly of others, even in small ways, we free ourselves from the prison of negativity. Carrying grudges, envy, or suspicion poisons our own hearts first before it ever touches anyone else. On the other hand, carrying thoughts of goodwill, even towards strangers, creates an inner lightness. I often practice this while walking the street, silently blessing the people I pass. May you find joy. May you be free from suffering. This simple practice transforms an ordinary walk into a meditation of connection. In our modern world, where judgment flows instantly through social media and gossip, this teaching feels more urgent than ever. The way we think about others shapes the collective atmosphere we all live in. A single kind thought may not change the whole world, but it changes the field around us, and that ripple matters. Ultimately, our thoughts about others are mirrors reflecting back on ourselves. When we see others with compassion, we nurture compassion within. When we project harshness, we reinforce harshness inside us. In this sense, every thought is an act of self-creation. By choosing to think of others with kindness, patience, and openness, we are also shaping a more peaceful and joyful self. So the invitation is simple yet profound. Watch your thoughts about others. Notice when they turn to judgment or resentment. Gently guide them back to compassion. Even if others never know, you will feel the difference. And so will they, in ways beyond words. Part 11, Karma in Relationships. Relationships are among the most powerful arenas where karma unfolds. Karma is often misunderstood as some kind of cosmic punishment or reward, but in its true sense, it simply means action and the consequences that follow. Our words, deeds, and even thoughts are seeds, and relationships are the fertile ground where those seeds quickly bear fruit. Think of how one careless remark can wound someone deeply, creating ripples of mistrust that last for years. Conversely, a small act of kindness, like listening without interrupting or offering help in a moment of need, can blossom into a bond of trust and love that endures. Relationships magnify karma because they are continuous fields of interaction. What we sow in them, we almost always reap. I once had a close friendship that fell apart. At first, I blamed the other person, replaying the hurtful things they had said. But when I looked more honestly, I saw how my own impatience and subtle criticisms had eroded the bond over time. My karma was not separate from theirs. It was woven together. The ending of that friendship became one of my greatest teachers, showing me how even unconscious actions create consequences in the shared field of relationship. Karma in relationships does not mean we are trapped in cycles of blame. It means we have power. Each moment offers a fresh opportunity to plant new seeds. If we have created distance through harshness, we can bridge it with patience. If we have built walls through silence, we can open them with honest conversation. Our past actions matter, but they do not imprison us. They invite us to grow wiser in the present. Family often makes karma especially visible. How many times do we repeat patterns passed down from parents or grandparents without realizing it? A sharp tone, a tendency to avoid conflict, a habit of overgiving. All of these are karmic echoes. Yet, when we bring awareness, we can transform these patterns instead of unconsciously transmitting them to the next generation. A father who learns to listen instead of criticize changes not only his relationship with his child, but also the karmic inheritance that child will carry forward. Romantic relationships, too, are fields where karma dances vividly. Attraction may seem sudden and mysterious, but often it carries the weight of unseen patterns. Some people repeatedly attract partners who mirror unresolved wounds. It is not fate punishing them. It is karma presenting an invitation to heal. Until the lesson is learned, the cycle repeats. Recognizing this can shift our perspective from why does this always happen to me to what is life inviting me to understand here. Friendships reveal another layer of karma. They thrive on generosity and authenticity, but weaken under neglect. I once reconnected with an old friend after years of silence. Initially, the distance made it awkward, but by consistently showing care, sending messages, making time, remembering important moments, the friendship revived. Karma was at work. New actions planting new seeds, eventually bearing the fruit of renewed closeness. One profound teaching about karma is that intention matters as much as action. A word spoken with love carries a different karmic weight than the same word spoken with sarcasm. A gift offered sincerely nourishes the bond. The same gift offered with obligation may leave a bitter aftertaste. Relationships are not shaped by what we do mechanically, but by the spirit behind what we do. Forgiveness also plays a karmic role. When we hold grudges, we carry the burden of negative karma within ourselves. Letting go, truly releasing resentment, frees not only the other person, but also us. I once wrote a letter of forgiveness to someone who had hurt me deeply. They never replied, but that act lifted a weight from my heart. My karma shifted, not because they changed, but because my own energy transformed. Ultimately, karma in relationships is not about keeping score. It is about awareness. Every smile, every word, every silence plants seeds. Some seed we harvest tomorrow, others years later. When we realize this, we treat relationships with greater care. We stop taking them for granted and start nurturing them with presence, patience, and kindness. In the end, the law of karma reminds us that relationships are sacred gardens. If we want love, we must plant compassion. If we want trust, we must water honesty. If we want joy, we must cultivate generosity. What we give returns, not always immediately, not always in the form we expect, but always in resonance with the seeds we've sown. Part 12, The Illusion of Control. One of the deepest sources of our suffering is the illusion that we can control life. We plan, predict, and prepare, believing that if we work hard enough or worry long enough, we can bend reality to our will. But life constantly reminds us of a harder truth. We are not in control of much at all. We don't control the weather, though we check forecasts daily. We don't control other people's choices, though we often try to influence them. We don't control the timing of health, aging, or even the exact moment of our death. And yet, despite knowing this, we cling to the fantasy of control, as if grasping tighter will shield us from uncertainty. I remember the year I meticulously planned a trip abroad. Tickets booked, itinerary printed, every detail arranged. Just days before departure, political unrest erupted in the country I was meant to visit, and the trip was canceled. At first, I felt anger and frustration, months of planning wasted. But later, I realized this was life's way of teaching me. Plans are helpful, but they are never guarantees. Control is always partial, never absolute. Buddhism calls this clinging to control a form of delusion. The mind fears uncertainty, so it tries to build structures to feel safe. But the very effort control often creates the opposite effect: stress, anxiety, and disappointment. The more we try to lock life into our expectations, the more painful it feels when life flows in another direction. Think of relationships. How often do we suffer because we want people to behave a certain way, to love us as we wish, to speak as we expect, to act according to our script? Yet people have their own stories, wounds, and freedoms. When we insist on controlling them, we suffocate the relationship. When we let go, space opens for genuine connection. This doesn't mean we should give up all responsibility. There's a difference between wise effort and control. We can study for an exam, but we cannot control the exact questions. We can care for our bodies, but we cannot guarantee perfect health. We can nurture a friendship, but we cannot dictate its outcome. Our role is to act with clarity and integrity, then release the results. I once heard a teaching that compared life to sailing. We cannot control the wind, but we can adjust our sails. If we insist the wind blow in a certain direction, we will be endlessly frustrated. But if we learn to work with the wind, sometimes gliding swiftly, sometimes tacking slowly against resistance, we discover a sense of harmony. The art is not controlling the wind, but cooperating with it. The illusion of control also appears in our attempts to manage time. We schedule every hour, trying to maximize productivity, yet unexpected events interrupt. A sudden illness, a traffic jam, an urgent call, life asserts itself. Paradoxically, when we stop trying to control every moment, we often find more freedom. Time feels spacious when we flow with it, rather than fight it. There is also a subtle arrogance in believing we can control everything. It ignores the vast web of conditions that make each moment possible. The food we eat depends on farmers, rain, soil, sunlight. Our very breath depends on trees we did not plant. To imagine we control life is to forget that we are participants in a vast interdependent dance. Letting go of control does not mean passivity. It means shifting from control to trust. Trust that life unfolds with wisdom larger than our plans. Trust that we can respond, adapt, and learn, even when events surprise us. Trust that sometimes what we did not choose turns out to be exactly what we needed. I recall a time when I lost a job unexpectedly. At first, it felt like failure, like life had betrayed me. But months later, I saw that the loss opened space for a new path I would never have dared to choose on my own. The ending I resisted was actually a doorway. Control would have kept me stuck. Surrender allowed me to grow. The more we release the illusion of control, the lighter we become. Anxiety softens because we no longer carry the impossible burden of trying to manage the unmanageable. Relationships deepen because we allow people to be themselves. Life becomes more adventurous, more alive, because we stop clinging to fixed outcomes and open to possibilities. So the invitation is this: plan wisely, act sincerely, and then let go. Control is a cage, but trust is a river. When we surrender the flow, we discover not weakness, but freedom. The freedom to meet life as it is, not as we demand it to be.